Hi, this is Dr. Branham here today to do a video on the governor of the state of Texas and the executive branch in the state of Texas. This video is designed to help you with your test, help supplement your reading. It's connected directly to your chapter reading that you're going to do or you were assigned for this class. So I'm hopeful that this video will help your understanding and help you with your tests as well. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and showing you this video is titled The Texas Executive Branch, a supplement presentation for the assigned book chapter on Texas governor and the Texas Executive Branch. And we're going to start by basically talking about the qualifications of the governor of Texas. In order to be elected governor of Texas, you have to be at least 30 years old. And while you do not have to be born in the state, a lot of people think you should be, you don't have to be. You just need to have lived here for the last 5 years when you get elected. The term of office is now 4 years. It used to be 2 years, but it's been 4 years for decades now. There are no term limits. Rick Perry, who served 14 years as governor, he followed George H.W. Bush when George H.W. Bush was elected president in 2000 and became president in 2001 and left the governorship. He followed George W. Bush into the office and served 14 years. He was the longest serving governor in Texas history. Gubernatorial history. Texas has never elected an African-American, Hispanic, or Asian governor. We've only had Anglo governors. All the governors in the current Constitution have been Protestant, with the exception of Greg Abbott. Abbott was the only Catholic to be elected Texas governor. I don't think it's a big issue anymore. You had to have that Southern Baptist connection. And almost all governors were Baptist before this. It hasn't even been an issue with Greg Abbott being a Catholic. You hardly ever hear it. So I don't think it's an issue any longer. There have only been 2 women governors of Texas, but there have been 2. One was Miriam Ma Ferguson, who followed her husband, Paul Ferguson, into office, and then was later elected in 1933 again, and Ann Richards, who was elected in 1991 and served those 4 years until George W. Bush became governor in 1995. And while Lyndon Johnson and George H.W. Bush were both presidents, and they were both from Texas, the only governor of Texas ever to be elected president was George W. Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush. So the father's now called George H.W. Bush. When he was president, they just called him George Bush. But we need that differentiation once we had the second George Bush, so now we have George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush. Just know that George H.W. Bush was the father, George W. Bush was the son, and George W. Bush was the governor before he became president. Texas, in comparison to the president of the United States, I'm just going to say right off, the governor of Texas has a lot less power in Texas than the president of the United States has in the United States. The governor's office is very diluted in comparison to the presidency. These include appointment to the cabinet, pardoning prisoners, and commuting prison sentences, selecting a running mate, budgeting, judicial appointments. All of these things are weaker for the governor than for the president of the United States. For instance, appointing a cabinet. While the president of the United States has the power to appoint cabinet members, like the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, Secretary of the Treasury, Homeland Security, the governor of Texas doesn't have the power to appoint cabinet members. The only person the governor of Texas can appoint is the Secretary of State. That's the exception. Texas has a plural executive branch where the cabinet members are elected statewide. The people elect cabinet members. And this makes it more difficult for the governor to implement his agenda her agenda when these cabinet members aren't really on their team. They're on their own team. In order to get elected, you have to have your own campaign. So while they may gel well together, they're not the same team. So the exception to this rule, as I said, is the Secretary of State. The governor of Texas can select the Secretary of State. But the Secretary of State doesn't do diplomacy and negotiations with other states. in comparison to what the Secretary of State does for the federal government. The Secretary of State's main job is to administer elections. In Texas, that's the main job, and it's usually like that across the country. State cabinet offices elected statewide. There are several cabinet offices elected statewide. One is like railroad commissioner. And this doesn't sound like a real powerful office, but when you consider that the responsibilities of the railroad commissioner include regulating oil and gas, trucking, mining, you see that the railroad commissioner has a lot of power. So this is a very big office. Rick Perry was actually kind of got his start by becoming railroad commissioner. Then there's commissioner of agriculture, because Texas is a big agriculture state. This is a big position too. The controller of public accounts. A lot of people don't know that the controller of public accounts even exists, but the controller has a very important position because the controller certifies the amount of projected income for the state. The budget has to stay within this projected amount of income. So when the legislature is coming in for their session in January of odd number years, the controller of public accounts hands them an estimate of what they can spend. That's what they're tied to. They don't get to go over that. They have to balance their budget. And that's why the controller of public accounts has a lot of power and has a lot of responsibility. The attorney general is also a cabinet member that gets elected. The attorney general interprets law for the state, submits federal lawsuits, and primarily has civil case responsibilities in the state. So the attorney general is very, very popular and very important when it comes to actual lawsuits and so forth. In a lot of cases, the Texas Attorney General is suing the federal government for things the federal government does policy-wise that affects the states. And if the Attorney General of the state believes that these things are unconstitutional, that the federal government has overstepped its bounds, so to speak, the Attorney General will lead that lawsuit against the federal government. Pardoning prisoners and commuting sentences. While the President of the United States has the power to pardon prisoners, the governor of Texas doesn't have that power. The governor can't grant pardons, but they can make recommendations to the Board of Pardons, who can take the governor's recommendation and grant the pardon if they wish. But it's completely within the hands of the Board of Pardons, not the governor. The governor can't stop an execution either. Texas is a big death penalty state, but the governor cannot stop an execution. He can stay in execution for 30 days, but after 30 days, that power is over. So sometimes when something's happening politically that may affect a death row inmate, sometimes the governor will use this power to give that inmate 30 more days. But it's a limited power. Selecting a running mate. The President of the United States, when he goes to the convention, the president or whoever the nominee is, he or she, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, whoever it is, they select their running mate when they get to the convention. And when they select that running mate, that is the person on their ticket. They are the ones who select it. The governor of Texas doesn't have that power. The lieutenant governor is the vice governor of Texas. The lieutenant governor is the one who replaces the governor if the governor leaves office. However, while the president of the United States selects the vice presidential running mate, the governor does not select that lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governor is elected by the voters, and it's very possible that the lieutenant governor will be a different party than the governor. The last time that happened was when Bob Bullock was lieutenant governor, when George W. Bush was governor. Now, Bob Bullock was pretty conservative Democrat, and he and George W. Bush seemed to get along very well. So that in that case, it wasn't a problem, but it very well could be that they could be from different parties. And even if they're in the same party, we've seen times when, because they weren't, the lieutenant governor was not the selection of the governor, that they, butted heads on occasion. So in the United States, the vice president's legislative duties are only to break a tie in the Senate vote. In Texas, though, the lieutenant governor leads the Senate and has far more legislative power than the vice president. And in Texas, the lieutenant governor's power in the legislature far exceeds his power in the executive branch, unless, of course, he becomes governor. So the lieutenant governor in previous decades was considered to be more powerful than the governor as far as, powers in the state. I think that opinion has went away as the governors we've had, Greg Abbott in particular, has found ways to increase their power. They found ways in the law to do that and procedures to do that. However, the lieutenant governor is still very powerful in the state of Texas. Budgeting. The legislature in Texas leads the budgeting process. In Congress, we always have a State of the Union address in the federal government. President has a State of the Union pretty much outlining the budget. In Texas, that isn't the case. The budgeting is basically done at the legislative level. The governor's responsibility is to sign it at the end. Now, the governor can veto certain parts of it, and it's not unusual for the governor to do that. But the budgeting, the legislature is the one that leads the budgeting process. Transfer of funds, for instance, that have been approved by the legislative budget board. If the legislative budget board, which is made up of leaders of the House and the Senate, they are the ones who have to approve transfers of funds made by the governor. If the governor says we need to transfer these funds here, the LBB has to approve that before it can happen. The state also, unlike the federal government, the state has to balance its budget. It doesn't get to run a deficit. The federal government is over $30 trillion in debt. They constantly run a deficit. The state of Texas doesn't. It has to balance its budget. So the budgeting power is, the governor doesn't have nearly the amount of budgeting power as the president of the United States. And then there's judicial appointments. Unlike the president of the United States, the governor does not make judicial appointments. In Texas, judges are elected. So if you want to be a judge, you end up doing a campaign to be elected. In the federal government, the president selects a judge and gets confirmation from the Senate. And those judges are selected for life. In Texas, judges are elected. They have terms. Once that term is over, they either retire or go run for re-election. The governor can make a judicial appointment to fill a vacancy, but that appointment is only good to the next election. So the appointment power, the judicial appointment power of the governor of Texas is far less than the power of the president in making judicial appointments in the federal government. The governor can make other appointments, though. While the governor is very limited in his appointment power or her appointment power, executive branch positions are there for appointment. Others like boards and commissions are also there. Governor makes a lot of appointments. One example is University of Regents. University of Regents are responsible for the administration of the state university systems. The U of H system has regents. They're the ones that actually hired the Chancellor Couture. They are the ones that make approvals of the budget, make approvals of promotions, approvals of hires. Most of it is rubber stamp. They tend to delegate that to their leaders, but they're the ones responsible, and it's the governor who selects those. And then there's a thing called senatorial courtesy. It's the prerogative of a Texas senator to reject a governor's appointment of a person who resides inside the senator's Senate district. So if a person resides in the Senate, inside the senator's Senate district, he can say, no, I don't want that person to be appointed, even though the governor wants that person appointed. That's the end of the video for Texas governor, Texas executive branch. Hope this video helps you out. It's my desire that you have a wide knowledge of the Texas governor and the executive branch, and have an understanding of how the dynamics of Texas are so much different than the federal government. If you need me, please email me. I'm happy to answer your email or schedule a Zoom visit. Have a great day.